Okay, so picture this. A movement, maybe a church planting movement,
Yeah.
just exploding. I mean, hundreds, thousands joining. And with that, bam, you've got this huge wave of new leaders popping up.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, right? A great problem to have.
Totally. But then the reality hits.
Yeah.
How do you actually support all these new leaders, especially when, maybe they can't just leave their lives for weeks of training or internet access is, well, inconsistent at best?
That's exactly the challenge our sources dig into. How do these fast-growing movements sustain themselves?
Because the pattern seems to be you get this initial burst.
Right, huge enthusiasm, things take off, but then so often it plateaus. And when you look closer, the bottleneck, it's almost always leadership development.
Oh, okay. The original leaders, the missionaries, maybe they just get stretched too thin.
Exactly, trying to mentor everyone, put out fires, keep things going, and suddenly there's no capacity left for more growth. The whole thing kind of grinds to a halt.
So the big idea we're exploring in this deep dive, based on our sources, is pretty counterintuitive maybe. It's not just about planting more churches or making disciples initially.
The core insight is that sustained movements are, fundamentally, leadership multiplication movements.
So you need the leadership engine before you even start the car, so to speak.
Pretty much. That capacity to reproduce leaders, that system needs to be there, or at least planned for, right from day one. Our sources call it the engine that the Spirit uses to sustain movements.
Wow. Okay, so let's unpack that. And you mentioned looking at historical examples.
Yeah, I mean, look at Paul. His ministry across those, 6 Roman provinces, it wasn't just random preaching stops.
There was a strategy.
A very clear strategy, and a huge part of it was identifying and developing leaders, intentionally.
The evidence seems pretty strong. Like a third of his letters weren't even to churches. They were to individuals he was mentoring.
Right. Timothy, Titus, Philemon, he's pouring into them while also encouraging the churches.
And it wasn't just those 3, was it? The sources mentioned, like dozens of names.
Over 30 individuals named in his letters who were partners, leaders, running churches. It shows it wasn't just Paul doing everything. He was building a team, raising up local leadership from the very beginning.
That bit in Acts 20, verse 4, really jumped out at me. This group traveling with him.
Sopater, Aristarchus, Secundus, Gaius, Timothy, Tychicus, Trophimus. Yeah, quite a list.
And they're from all over the place where he'd worked.
Exactly. And think about the timeline. This is maybe, 3 to 10 years into his missionary journeys? He'd already identified and developed these key people in a relatively short time. That shows rapid development was happening.
And then that moment in Ephesus, Acts 20 again, where he bypasses the main church gathering.
Yeah. He sails past Ephesus, but calls the elders, the leaders, to meet him down the coast in Miletus.
Why? I mean, why prioritize just the leaders?
Because he knew his time was limited. He needed to invest strategically in those who would guide the movement after he left. Ensuring the leaders were equipped was the priority for long-term health and expansion in Asia.
That really drives home the point. It wasn't just about immediate numbers.
No, it was about sustainable impact, which links straight back to that verse, Timothy 2.2, right? Entrust things to faithful people who will be able to teach others also.
Chain reaction.
Exactly. He wasn't just looking for his replacement. He was building, as our sources put it, an ever-expanding system of leadership development, something bigger than himself.
Okay, Paul's model is powerful, but let's get practical. How do you actually build that kind of system today with all those constraints we mentioned, limited time, maybe limited resources, geographic spread?
Well, the first principle, and it's crucial, is planning for it before you even start that first discipleship group or church.
So think multiplication from day 0.
Right. The system itself needs to be designed for rapid maturing of leaders and, ideally, unlimited expansion. If your pipeline is narrow, the movement stops growing.
And a big part of that seems to be rethinking how training actually happens. The traditional model of pulling people out for long seminary courses
Often just doesn't work in these contexts. It can actually be detrimental, pulling key people out of the very place they're needed.
So what's the alternative?
The key is on-the-job training, bringing the training to the leaders in their location.
Like theological education by extension, but maybe more dynamic?
Kind of like tea on steroids, yeah. That's how one source described it. It has to reach the fringes where the growth is happening.
So what does that look like practically?
Could be lots of things. Maybe monthly training, like a Friday, Saturday, within a few hours travel for everyone.
Right.
Or for movements spread further out, maybe bigger gatherings, 4 to 10 days, a few times a year in different hub cities.
Okay.
Or in rural areas, maybe an intensive conference during the rainy season when farming slows down. You adapt it to their life rhythm.
That makes so much sense. Learning while doing, which ties into the next principle, right? Just-in-time training.
Exactly. You give them the training they need when they need it for the challenges they are facing right now in their ministry. Not a huge block of theory years before they need it.
The retention must be way higher.
Oh, absolutely. Because they apply it immediately.
Yeah.
And they can troubleshoot right away, get feedback, adjust. It's learning in the real world, not a classroom bubble.
Okay, but with things moving so fast, new leaders popping up everywhere, how do you ensure everyone's still on the same page? That the core vision doesn't get diluted, this idea of retaining the movement's DNA?
Super important. You have to constantly reinforce the vision, reaching every town, every village. Our sources mention using tools like generational maps.
What are those?
Basically, visual ways to track how the churches are multiplying generation by generation and see where the gaps are. It keeps the big picture in focus.
But it's not just strategy, is it? There's a warning about strange teachings creeping in.
Yeah, guarding against extra-biblical teaching is critical. There's this sobering story in the source material about a missionary couple.
Right.
They had a growing movement, but then this traveling teacher came through and basically told the new believers their local leaders weren't, properly credentialed to do baptisms or communion.
Oh, no.
And it just halted the movement. People got confused. Confidence was undermined. It shows how vulnerable things are if that core DNA isn't strong and protected internally.
Wow, yeah. A lack of confidence in their own trained leaders. That's tough.
Yeah.
Which leads to another point. Focusing on training the fruitful leaders. It's not about treating everyone exactly the same.
No, it's strategic. Those leaders who are actually multiplying churches, raising up other leaders, they need the most focused input. Call it mid-level training.
Why?
Because they have the biggest ripple effect. And honestly, they're often the ones most at risk of burnout if they're not equipped for their expanding roles.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned a specific example here too, didn't they? About training getting diluted.
Yeah. A missionary realized his training for these key mid-level leaders was becoming less effective because, well, less fruitful members started showing up too. The content got watered down.
So he had to restrict it.
Had to. To keep the training sharp and relevant for those who are really driving the multiplication, it's a bit like Paul saying in 1 Corinthians, milk before solid food, you tailor the input.
Okay, so you focus on the fruitful, you train them just in time, on the job. How do you make this scale, like truly massive scale? How does the system itself multiply?
That's the goal. A system for limitless expansion of leadership development. It cascades.
Wow.
Your top national leaders, they don't just lead, they mentor others to reproduce that mid-level training within their own streams or regions of the movement.
Ah, so they're training the trainers.
Exactly. And then those top leaders focus on raising up the next wave of what our sources call apostolic leaders, people who can oversee large sections of the movement and develop other high-level leaders.
So it keeps replicating outwards and upwards.
Right. There's this incredible statistic mentioned, a CPM with over 1 million believers, and they had about 30 key apostolic leaders overseeing numerous monthly mid-level training hubs. That scale.
That's amazing. But it can't just be about skills and strategy, can it? What about the leaders themselves as people?
Absolutely critical. The sources stress dealing with the whole person. You can't just drill evangelism and church planting techniques in some sterile environment.
Burnout would be inevitable.
Totally. Effective training has to include worship, rest, personal support, counseling if needed, deep dives into scripture together, dealing with interpersonal stuff.
Like the issues Paul addresses in Timothy and Titus.
Precisely. Character, relationships, spiritual health. Ignore that, and the best strategies in the world won't sustain the leaders long term.
And related to not overwhelming them, there's this idea of giving deep spiritual truths in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, one person shared their mistake trying to cram way too much theology into short training sessions. Just overloaded people.
All right, Proverbs 15.2. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable. It has to be digestible.
Kevin Greason calls it the straw principle of training. You deliver substantial teaching, but sipping through a straw small, digestible amounts consistently over time, that allows for real absorption and growth.
I like that analogy.
I
Okay,
know.
final principle from our sources. Maintaining contact with multiple levels of leaders. Why is that so important?
Resilience. Especially in tough places. If all your connection, all your training flows through one single top leader.
You've got a single point of failure.
Exactly. What if they're arrested, get sick, burn out. The whole development process can just collapse.
So you need redundancy.
You need to intentionally connect with leaders at different generations, encourage networking between those mid-level leaders. It builds a safety net, ensures continuity, even if one person is taken out of the picture.
Okay, so pulling it all together.
Yeah.
This deep dive really highlights that leadership development isn't just like a nice add-on for a growing movement.
No, it's the absolute core. It's the engine. Proactive, continuous, multi-level leadership development is what allows these movements to sustain growth, scale up, and survive challenges.
So the key takeaway for you listening, whether you're in ministry or maybe even leading a fast-growing business or nonprofit,
Yeah.
these ideas are fundamental.
Yeah. Starting early, making it practical and on the job, distributing the responsibility, focusing on multiplication. These aren't optional extras for long-term impact. They're foundational.
Which leaves us with a question to chew on. Thinking about the movements or organizations you know,
Yeah.
where are the hidden bottlenecks in leadership development? What's holding things back?
And maybe how could a more intentional focus on multiplying leaders using some of these principles unlock potential and resilience you haven't seen yet?
Definitely powerful stuff to consider. A lot to think about there.